Video games, still my favorite medium for their potential if nothing else. So, in honor of E3 and this game, which I can stop playing anytime I want, my second topic is what makes video games so unique as a method of storytelling. Ludonarrative. Spoilers for certain media in the description. First off, what is ludonarrative? The word is a compound from Latin ludo, meaning I play, or ludology, the study of video games, and narrative, the events in a story. Therefore, it's defined as where the gameplay elements and the narrative elements in a game intersect. Many people will think of a story in a game as distinct or even completely extrinsic from what they play. However, they're both parts of an inseparable whole. There are also the terms ludonarrative dissonance and ludonarrative harmony. The definition of ludonarrative dissonance I'm going with is when the narrative clashes with the play. For example, in Tomb Raider, there's a touching cinema clip where Laura nearly cries after killing a deer. But immediately after this, the player is reported if they go about killing deer as much as they can. And ludonarrative dissonance happens much more often than people realize. Like most open world games, in Breath of the Wild, you have a plethora of side quests which distract from the main quest. The dialogue of the story implies a sense of urgency to defeat the main antagonist, whom Zelda has struggled to hold down for 100 years. But it also gives the player the chance to help a random guy find all his chickens. I guess an extra 10 minutes isn't so much to ask for in the grand scale of a century, but I think the juxtaposition speaks for itself. So ludonarrative dissonance is an inconsistency, a plot hole. Many gamers and those in the industry have contempt for the term, and it is often misused. However, the reason is because of just how prominent it is in games. Knowing it's a plot hole, pointing it out in a game they love gives them about 3 options. Deny it, object to the validity of the term, or accept the criticism and love their game despite its flaws. I trust you know how often that last one works out. Also, some people object to the term because they think video games have nothing to do with good stories. We don't talk about those people. Moving on, as you probably guessed, ludonarrative harmony is the opposite of ludonarrative dissonance. It's when the gameplay resonates with the narrative. Narrative mechanics. Contrasting the Tomb Raider example, in Mark of the Ninja, you're rewarded with sneaking past people without killing them, staying true to character since Ninja would only kill as a last resort. You might notice all the examples I stated revolve around main characters. This is because in most clearly story-driven games, especially RPGs, the main character is all the player controls. But this results in a protagonist that's never fully the player and never fully their own entity. Many games will have the avatar become a blank slate for the player to imagine themselves as, only giving them attributes everyone can get behind, like they'll fight the bad guy. Much Persona. Sometimes it's not hard to see oneself as the avatar, but it's often jarring. There's never any meaningful interaction with other characters when this type is used, since there's no personality to bounce off of. Sometimes they react to the lack of personality. Ever heard a character say, "You're not one for talking, are you?" Then thought, "No, I'm just not given many lines." And this especially shows during any attempt at romance. Others have the main character's persona already determined, so since the player can't have too much agency over them, they're usually only able to control procedural events. Action most of the time. Recently, choice-heavy games have gained popularity, which I'm in favor of in theory, but combined with this type of protagonist, it unleashes a can of worms. When there's a character arc in storytelling, it's shown by the character's decisions which lead to their new state. In this case, the protagonist progresses from their persona, but the only input the player has is to further them on their already set destination. Or when the player does have a choice which develops the path of the protagonist, usually in the climax, it can completely contradict what the rest of the game was foreshadowing. Life is Strange avoids this by telling the audience Max has developed. You've changed. Vaguely. The most used route to distribute narrative without giving the player control of the persona is cutscenes. Now, I've enjoyed my share of cutscenes, but the majority of them are used as an excuse to deliver narrative outside of gameplay. For one, that's riding on the coattails of film and TV, and it also breaks the immersion, although sometimes there is a good narrative reason to take control from the player. Breath of the Wild found a creative way to deliver its first act by having you wake up with retrograde amnesia, and that being one of the biggest cliches in gaming aside, later on you can travel to certain locations to regain many of your first act memories, which are cutscenes. They can be used, but unless it's for a purpose, gameplay is outstandingly more effective. Regardless of which protagonist is used, it's not the player's story. The protagonist's raison d'etre propel the story forward, and if the player is only pushing the plot on a track, the best a writer can do to retain meaningfulness is make the player think they want to push the plot in their written path. Which is why we get so many obviously evil villains in games. Everyone could get behind defeating Lord Evil Villain. The avatar becomes more of a mask for the player, rather than a vessel for their self. While there will always be a place for those games, it seems to me mainstream games will eventually need to retain the player's persona to achieve better ludonarrative harmony. Instead of an RPG where the player plays a role in the writer's story, how about a role-adapting game where the player adapts to meet their own goal, aiding or overcoming the intricate motivations of other characters where other games rely on more material obstacles? A narrative sandbox, if you will. Take this game for instance. It takes place in feudal Europe. There are knights, kings, serfs, clergy. The player doesn't have a choice in who their character is any more than the character had a choice in what they were born into. When one gamer starts his first playthrough, he's set on being a king or maybe just a knight the least. Naturally, he's brought into the role of a princess, guarded safely out of harm's way. So, after a lot of trial and error, she manages to sneak out of the castle. From there, she has to remain incognito, picking up swordplay to reach his goal of knighthood. She becomes a freelance, slowly rising the ranks of her company. However, someone there is clever enough to find out her identity. Luckily, she'd been saving some dirt on him, otherwise she might need to resort to violence. In the third act, the player finds the same kingdom he escaped from occupied by a rival company, forcing her to take irreversible action. He could stay a freelance, or he could become a monarch. It might not seem feasible, but with the knowledge of story structure, there's already a model to work with. If the player isn't stepping outside their normal world soon enough, then unleash an inciting event. If the player chooses a combat-centric way of life for their avatar, then the third act should be combat-focused. Instead of foreshadowing acting like warning signs for a single path, it'd be more two-dimensional. The possibilities through ludonarrative harmony are sublime to me. Even knowing it'll be a while before the game industry gets to this point, there are a few things I'm more excited for. And even if you're not a gamer, just an author or a playwright, any kind of storyteller, you should be too. Because this will be the first time the story wasn't written by the author, but truly by the audience. So, if you have any questions, please feel free to leave me a comment or a tweet. My next video will be on dialogue, so if you have any questions about that, now's your chance. See you next time.